At the beginning of that year, Penelope was 35, her internal clock set to the early hours of the morning. She worked the night shift at a neighborhood coffee shop that smelled of vanilla, hot grease, and reheated coffee. She'd leave with her hands saturated with that sour scent and a feeling of exhaustion that clung to her skin like damp sugar. Her apartment was small and unassuming, walls marked with tape where drawings had once been, a refrigerator with crooked magnets, a table with 2 creaking chairs. She lived there with Ava, her 4-year-old daughter, with enormous eyes and a badly cut fringe that she herself had tried to even out in front of the mirror. And yet, every Monday at 9 o'clock sharp, while the street was still yawning, Penelope unlocked her phone and sent $700 to her parents. Not out of love, that love which in her home had always been a crumpled receipt, but out of inertia, out of fear, and out of the childlike hope that perhaps they would look at her again as a daughter. Her parents lived half an hour away, in the house inherited from her grandfather, closed blinds, a lemon tree that only bore fruit on the neighbor's side, and a gate that creaked but never opened for Ava. When they called, it was always to ask for something: a car battery, the pharmacy bill, a mistake on the credit card, a grocery order they just happened to need today. Their tone was always bureaucratic, like someone talking to a bank. Teller, curt, urgent, without a please or thank you. Penelope answered yes as naturally as she breathed, even when her balance was already a broken tile floor. She had learned that, in that family, affection was measured in bank transfers and loyalty in PDF receipts. Meanwhile, Ava drew suns with eyelashes and asked why her grandparents never came. Penelope answered with adult evasions, the kind that smell of a promise she knows she can't keep. Over time, that routine became an automatic reflex, like turning on the light when entering or checking the gas before leaving. Penelope knew that every dollar cent was another crack in her own ceiling, but something inside her was afraid to break the silence that maintained that fragile semblance of family. When she dared to write a more personal message, she received cold, almost robotic replies, as if written by someone who barely knew her. "We're fine, thanks." The money arrived. Not a word about Ava, not a "we love you," not a random call. Sometimes, in the solitude of the early morning, while cleaning cups and arranging chairs in the empty cafe, she imagined how different her life would have been if, as a child, someone had told her that she didn't have to earn love. The ultimate test came on Ava's birthday. Penelope had worked all week to prepare a modest but heartwarming party, a vanilla cake decorated with foil stars, balloons tied to the table leg, and a crooked garland that read, "Happy Birthday," at 3 in the afternoon. The patio smelled of damp confetti and freshly squeezed lemonade. Ava, dressed in a pink tutu and sequined shoes, glanced every now and then toward the gate, waiting for her grandparents. Hours passed, and they didn't appear. Not a message, not a call, not even a simple happy birthday. Only at dusk did the phone vibrate with a curt notification: "Tell Ava happy birthday from us." Penelope felt something inside her go out, like a candle no longer worth blowing out. That night, when Ava fell asleep in her dress, Penelope sat at the sink, her hands still in the warm water. She had washed dishes for years, but this time she felt she was washing away a lie. She dialed her father's number without thinking, her voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. On the other end, she heard the television and an indifferent tone, as if the call were interrupting a well-deserved rest. "Why didn't you come? It was your granddaughter's birthday." There was such a long silence that Penelope thought the line had gone dead. Then her father uttered the words that left her breathless. "Your daughter means nothing to us." No reply, No apology, just the metallic click of someone hanging up, letting 30 years of illusions fall to the floor. Penelope didn't cry right away. She lay motionless, staring at the distorted reflection of her face in the water. The clock read 2:20 a.m. when, without planning it, she did what she'd never allowed herself to do. She opened her bank app and cancelled all the automatic transfers, one by one. She felt a tingling in her chest, a mixture of fear and relief. When she finished, she turned off her phone and lay down on the sofa, enveloped in a silence so thick it felt almost physical. For the first time in a long time, her breathing didn't depend on anyone's approval. Dawn found her with her eyes open, sensing that something new, something she couldn't yet name, had begun inside her. 40 minutes later, as if money had its own radar, her phone vibrated with a message. "Could you order us some food? We ran out of gas." Penelope read it without blinking. Once, twice, 3 times, trying to grasp the nonchalance of the request. Not an apology, not a mention of what had happened the night before. As if nothing had happened, as if cruelty could be erased with a delivery order. She left the message unanswered. That silence was her first form of defense, and, though brief, it carried the weight of a revolution. Outside, dawn was breaking, and inside her something akin to freedom was beginning to emerge from the ruins. For the next few days, Penelope continued her routine without looking back. She worked, made breakfast for Ava, and even the air seemed lighter. But the past, like a wounded animal, always finds a way to bite again. One morning, while making coffee, she received a message from her cousin Lauren. "You have to see this." It was a Facebook link. Her parents were live streaming, the camera out of focus, and their voices strained, crying in front of dozens of viewers. They said Penelope was lying, that she had forced them to accept money, that she was publicly humiliating them, that they loved their granddaughter. And then, between fake sobs, her father repeated, in the same stony voice, "That girl doesn't exist for us." The video spread like wildfire. In less than an hour, half the town had seen it. Neighbors were chatting in messaging groups. Regulars at the cafe were mentioning it cautiously, and even the local pastor had discreetly stopped sending them his usual Sunday greetings. Penelope didn't respond, didn't post anything, didn't explain. She simply stared at the blank screen, listening to the echo of those words that now the whole world could hear. She had spent years trying to explain who her parents were. That night, they had done it for her, all on their own. It was the first time she felt that silence served as a shield, not a punishment. If you've made it this far, you probably understand that kind of invisible exhaustion, the kind that comes from continuing to try when there's nothing left to save. Tell me, wherever you're reading this from, have you ever set a boundary that changed your life? Sometimes a single decision, a cancelled transfer, a door we never open again, is enough to begin our true story. Penelope didn't know it yet, but that night she hadn't just stopped a payment. She had signed her emotional independence with the same precision with which others sign their freedom. The following days were a strange mix of peace and chaos. While Penelope tried to maintain a routine, taking Ava to the garden, working her shift at the cafe, paying the bills with the money that had previously vanished into other people's hands, her parents faced the consequences of their own charade. The church turned its back on them, the landlord began demanding back rent, and some relatives blocked them from family groups. The odd thing was that, even then, they weren't seeking reconciliation, but control. They sent emails and messages hinting that they could fix things if she resumed making deposits. Penelope read them with a serenity she had never felt before. She didn't reply. Her silence was her new voice, a way of saying no more, without uttering a single word. That's when her brother Ryan, whom she had barely seen in years, showed up one afternoon at her door with a toolbox in one hand and a weary expression on his face. He had watched the live stream, read the comments, and needed no explanation. They sat in the kitchen, with mismatched mugs and a sincerity that required no drama. Ryan confessed that he too had been sending money for years, convinced that he was helping, and that, like her, he felt betrayed. That day, two weary adults understood that they had been victims of the same manipulation and that the only way to heal was to break the cycle together. From that reunion onward, something began to shift in the air. Penelope and Ryan became a sort of makeshift family, more real than any photograph from the past. On weekends, he would stop by the house with tools to fix broken things, and Ava would follow him everywhere, calling him superhero uncle. At the cafe, her colleagues noticed a different glow in Penelope. It wasn't pure joy, but a newfound calm, the kind that comes when you stop justifying the unjustifiable. For the first time in years, money was enough, food tasted different, and the silence in the house no longer hurt. It was restful. Lauren, the cousin who had sent the video, decided to take it a step further. At a family meeting called by Penelope's parents, a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation, she arrived with a small speaker and her phone in hand. She waited for the adults to begin their victimhood narrative and with a single tap played the audio recording of the father's words, "That girl means nothing to us." The room fell silent. Some lowered their gaze, others stood up and left without a word. For the first time, the weight of truth fell where it belonged. Penelope wasn't there, but she felt the tremor from afar, as if the universe were finally putting the pieces in their place. That same night, Ryan told her what had happened. Penelope didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't feel vengeful. She just took a deep breath, like someone releasing an invisible weight she'd carried on her back since childhood. "That's it," she said softly, while Ava slept clutching her favorite doll. She understood that justice doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence, when you stop begging for explanations and simply keep walking. The bathroom mirror reflected a different face back to her, that of a woman who, without knowing it, had survived an emotional war without firing a single shot. The following days were filled with small, everyday miracles. Ava started laughing again without looking at the door, drawing hearts with crooked crayons, and asking when they were going to see Uncle Ryan. Penelope, for her part, began to sleep better. The nights were no longer a battlefield, but a space where she could think about the future without fear. She even allowed herself a luxury she had forgotten, buying a new dress, not to impress anyone, but to feel alive. Every small gesture was a way of rebuilding the self-love that her parents had tried to erode for years. Over time, the story faded from a local scandal into a distant rumor, an anecdote people recounted without truly understanding the pain behind it. Penelope, however, didn't need anyone to understand. The peace of her new life was enough. She had learned that not all ties are sacred, and that severing some can also be an act of love. Her house, once so quiet, now filled with the sound of Ava and Ryan's laughter, the smell of toast on Sundays, and a serenity she had never known. She had ceased to be the obedient daughter and had become the mother her daughter deserved. Over time, the story faded from a local scandal into a distant rumor, a shadow that barely touched her new reality. Penelope no longer needed explanations or apologies. She understood that silence, when born of self-respect, can also be an answer. Her house was filled with life again. Ava and Ryan's laughter, the smell of toast on Sundays, and the feeling, as new as it was fragile, of belonging to a place where no one owed her anything. She was no longer the daughter who waited to be loved. She was the woman who had learned to love herself. The change in Penelope was as subtle as it was profound. She had stopped checking her phone, waiting for apologies, and even old messages from her parents seemed like distant echoes from another life. She began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed, the way Ava hugged her for no reason, the sound of the water boiling as she made tea, the golden light streaming through the bedroom window at sunset. Every little moment was silent proof that she had done the right thing. At the cafe, her colleagues commented that she seemed different, lighter, and Penelope simply smiled, knowing that it wasn't just sudden happiness, but something more solid, emotional freedom. One autumn morning, while Ava was painting watercolors on the floor, Penelope opened an old expense notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. The first few pages were filled with all the transfers she had made to her parents, dates, amounts, notes like for the car, for medicine, for the house. The last few blank pages seemed like a mirror to her new life. She took a pen and wrote in firm letters, "Love that demands constant sacrifice is not love, it's debt." She closed the notebook and put it away without sadness. In that simple gesture, she understood that the cycle was truly over, and that what came next no longer depended on anyone else. Ryan used to spend Saturday afternoons with them. He'd fix things around the house, teach Ava to ride a bike, and sometimes he'd just stay for dinner. Those evenings were peaceful, filled with light conversation and laughter that stretched late into the night. At one of those dinners, Penelope noticed something that deeply moved her. Ava, laughing with her uncle, called him my family. Not my uncle, not Mum's brother, but my family. That simple word, spoken with the innocence of a child, sealed the closure of a cycle that had begun with pain and ended with belonging. Penelope understood that she had managed to break an invisible legacy of emotional coldness. The months passed with the serenity of someone who no longer expects storms. Penelope began studying business administration at night, something she had always wanted to do and which had previously seemed an unattainable luxury. Money, though just enough, went further when it wasn't wasted on perpetuating other people's guilt. Sometimes she thought of her parents, not with resentment, but with detachment. She no longer wished they would change. She wished they would be left behind. And while Ava grew up, strong and cheerful, Penelope discovered a new version of herself, a woman who, after years of invisible wounds, had become her own refuge. One Sunday afternoon, as the wind stirred the living room curtains, Penelope decided to clean out an old wardrobe where she kept things she no longer used. Among letters and yellowed papers, she found a childhood photograph, herself, about 6 years old, sitting between her parents, smiling with a missing tooth. She gazed at it for a long time. In the picture, her mother had her hand on her shoulder, but now she could see something she hadn't noticed before. The stiffness, the distance in her gaze. She didn't feel nostalgia, but a new peace, as if she were closing a book she had read too many times. She placed the photograph in a box, and as she closed it, she knew it wasn't an act of rejection, but of rest. That night, while Ava slept, Penelope sat by the window. With a cup of tea, the silence a backdrop. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, a dog barking, the sound of a distant train, a couple arguing on the corner. Inside, calm reigned. She thought about everything that had happened, the transfers, the insults, the absences, the tears that no longer had a place. And she realized something essential, that the purest love she possessed was the love she shared with her daughter, the kind that asked for nothing in return, that knew neither debt nor blackmail. In that instant, she understood that she had gained far more than she had lost. Winter arrived gently that year, with cold mornings and clear skies. Penelope and Ava began going for early walks, bundled up in colourful scarves they had knitted themselves. Sometimes they stopped to buy bread at the same bakery where, months before, Penelope had counted out her coins to pay. Now she did it calmly, without the burden of having to choose between her daughter and the demands of others. At the cafe, her colleagues noticed that she no longer spoke in a low voice or apologized for existing. She moved with a quiet dignity, the dignity of someone who had survived abandonment and transformed it into a source of strength. Ryan used to tell her that somehow she had taught the whole family what love truly meant. If you're reading this and recognize something in your own story, please share it. It might help someone who's still hesitant to set boundaries. And tell me, if you'd like, where you're reading this from or what you learned from letting go of someone who hurt you. Because sometimes true strength isn't in resisting, but in ceasing to beg for affection where it never existed. Penelope understood this when she realized her worth didn't depend on a phone call, but on the reflection of her daughter laughing at her happiness. One afternoon, Penelope took Ava to the park where they used to go before everything. They sat under the same tree where she had cried years before, and this time the breeze didn't seem so cold. Ava was playing with Ryan, running after a blue kite that seemed to float effortlessly, free, just like them. Penelope watched them with a newfound serenity, feeling that she had finally understood something that had taken her decades to discover, that emotional freedom doesn't come with revenge or apologies, but with the peace of knowing that you no longer need to convince anyone of your own worth. That night, on the way home, Ava fell. Asleep in the back seat, Penelope slowed down and watched the city lights reflect on the windshield. She thought about everything she had left behind, what she had gained, and what still remained to be built. Silently, she thanked life for bringing her this far, even though the journey had been cruel. She was no longer afraid of emptiness, because she had learned to fill it with true love. She closed the front door, picked up her sleeping daughter, and whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "We're okay finally.